Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Peah, Chapter 1, Halacha 5, Part 2 of the Shir in the Art Scroll 15a2. Yesterday, we were talking about intricacies of Beurim, and it turns out that there are two references in the Torah as Beurim. One is talking about referring it to the first fruits of the earth. Later on, it's referring to the gift, Beurim, where it's saying the Beurim of your land you shall bring to the house of Hashem your God. Over there, the idea is that one is obligated to give from the produce, basically that there's an order. Okay, you have Beurim, you have Truma, you have Meiser Rishon, you have Meiser Sheni. Beurim is going to be the first. Now in the rest of the Halacha, we're going to be getting into disruptions of this order. The Torah is laying out that you have to tithe in order. The Torah elsewhere in Devarim is also ordering that you have to listen to the sages and the D'Rabbanan rulings and the D'Rabbanan restrictions. It says you shall listen to what the sages of the day say, and you shall not go left or right. That is a halacha d'oraita. And today we're going to be really getting into this. What happens if you are not following the sages? What's going to happen to you? And there's a lot of agadada with it. And we're also going to be getting into what's happening with dishonest businessmen and how Hashem hates. I don't know if he would use the word soneh, but there's a strong correlation between destruction and disruption of what you're doing and dishonest business practices. And in fact, in the Chazan Ish's book, Muna and Bitachon, it says that if you're a businessman and that you're not learning the halachot of Choshen Mishpat every day, on some basis you're stealing. You're stealing on some basis because Torah law is intricate. You can't just sit and convince yourself that everything is okay, as the Chazan Ish is saying, that you have to really get into the guts of the halacha on learning, Torah business law. One of the reasons that the rabbis made this restriction on doing business with grain that has not been tithed is that you end up with stealing. You end up stealing from the tribe of the Kohanim and the tribe of the Levim. Why? Because in some way you are depriving that tribe their gift that's guaranteed in the Torah, and you're also diminishing the amount that's available for them. The Gemara is going to identify the authorship of the Mishnah's first ruling regarding Peah. The Mishnah stated in this Mishnah, chapter 1, Halacha 5, that if someone gives Peah, one gives as Peah always, and he is exempt from the Meiser obligations until he goes and he tithes the produce and smooths it. He heaps it up into a pile and smooths it. And by adding the word always, the Mishnah is implying, says Arash Cirilio, that as long as produce is given as Peah, it will be exempt from Meiser, even when the owner has previously fulfilled his Peah obligation by leaving a 60th of the crop, and now he wants to add to that amount. And since there is no longer any Peah obligation, this new designation does not actually take effect as Peah. And this, by the way, is very connected with Beurim. Sometimes you want to go and add extra Beurim. And you say, okay, I'm bringing some Beurim, but I have some nicer fruits over here, so I'm going to add that in. Well, it's called supplementary Beurim. And basically, you've already done Beurim. Now you have to go add a little extra because you want to make it nicer when you're bringing it to the Kohanim in the temple. Well, that new supplementary amount is not really going to be Beurim. You have to tithe it. And that's why this and that is going to be next to each other. Now, if you really have Peah, that's going to be in the range of Hefker. And over there, for Hefker, you don't have to worry about tithes. And so you don't have to worry that if you're taking Peah, that you're eating Tevel. Tevel, by the way, is very serious because you have death from heaven. And that's one of the serious things that the rabbis were trying to protect against with these fences that they put up to make sure that you are not eating Tevel. Now, the Mishnah is going to talk about the view of Bet Shammai. And in fact, the Gemara says the Mishnah reflects the view of Bet Shammai. And Bet Shammai says that produce declared ownerless just for the poor is legally ownerless and thus exempt from Meiser. So we saw earlier in Masechet Peah that there's a maloket between Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel on the status of Hefker. Bet Hillel says, wait a second, no. If you're declaring something Hefker, it's available for everyone to take. It's not just available for poor people. And Bet Hillel says about Bet Shammai that if you make this designation saying only for poor people, you didn't make a statement. It's not a legal statement. It's not a Torah statement. And so what happened is you didn't say anything. It's not Hefker at all. Big implications. According to Bet Shammai, they're saying, look, any produce given as Peah and then is going to be left for the poor, even where the Peah designation does not take effect, is going to be exempt from Meiser because the owner has in effect declared it ownerless for acquisition by the poor. In other words, Bet Shammai is saying that, look, when you're adding this supplementary amount and you're saying it's for the poor, yeah, it's still going to be Hefker. And it's still going to be like Peah. And Peah or Hefker are both exempt from tithes. And therefore, according to Bet Shammai, it's exempt from tithes. Bet Hillel, of course, disputes it. And Halacha is going to be like Bet Hillel. And is going to hold that an owner's declaration of Hefker has no legal effect when you're limiting it. And you're saying, oh, it can only go to this group of people and not that group of people. So therefore, if someone's declaring produce to be ownerless and saying it's only for the poor, according to the Halacha and Bet Hillel, it does not become ownerless at all. And then even the poor, by the way, doesn't have right to take it. Why? Because it's not Hefker. And certainly if somebody acquired it, it might actually be stolen property. And it becomes very serious. So the Gemara now is going to get into the fourth ruling of the Mishnah. And it says that one may take from the threshing floor and plant. And it says that he is exempt from the Meiser obligation until he heaps the produce into a pile and he smooths it. And those are the words of Rabbi Akiva. Now, there's a few things that are coming up over here. We're talking about getting seed crop. We're talking about getting, not for food, okay? You're not getting, from the threshing floor something that you're going to turn into challah or bread or, something like that. You're getting because you're going to take part and you're a farmer and you want to go plant it. So are you going to tithe it or not? That's where we're going with this. So Rabbi Akiva's ruling says this Gemara, which states that one may plant untithed produce that has not been heaped into a pile and smoothed, conforms with the view of the Brisa that criticizes the practice of the shops of the people of Hanun. Now, this, by the way, is a very famous case about theft, a very famous case about not following the sages and the restrictions and thinking that you know more than everyone else. So over there you can see the parallel in Baba Metzia 88a in the Bavli. The Bet Hanan is going to be, or Bet Hanun in the Yerushalmi, is going to be this very famous story where the people are going to be having these shops and they're going to be selling untithed produce. They're going to be making the case that it's doraita, that they don't have to tithe it. We learned in Masechet Demai, there's a rule that if you are a shopkeeper and if you are selling smaller quantities than wholesale quantities, that you have to tithe it. If you are selling large quantities that are so big they're heaping, okay, these wholesale transactions are going to be exempt from tithes for Demai. The person who's buying it has to tithe it, and you have to inform them. One of the reasons why the sages put the burden on the buyer is because they were putting in big tax penalties on the shopkeepers. And it was the Roman government doing it. And what was happening was they were afraid that nobody would end up tithing. They were afraid that, look, the burden would be so high if all of the tithes on these wholesale product would have to be taken out by the shopkeepers, that they may not do it because they're being squeezed for all these taxes, and they'll just skip it, and then you'll end up with people eating tevel. So they put the burden on the buyer for the wholesale. Now, in the case of smaller retail where it's all measured out, then it's going to be on the seller to do. Why? Because the case that they had over there was that children would come and buy these smaller quantities, and they would use them to like roast and make into like treats. And that was one of the candies that they had at the time, was that they would take these kernels like barley and you roast them and they become very sweet. And that's in fact what they make beer out of and what they make malt drinks out of. It's very sweet. There's a chemical reaction with the sugars when you roast barley or even some wheat, and this used to be the candy of the day. They would end up not tithing it even if they were doing these retail transactions. And then you set up basically a stumbling block, and you're not allowed to set up a stumbling block in front of a blind person. That's a d'oraita obligation, and that is going to be a hekesh, right? The Kuthians read this, by the way, as a literal thing. That's why they didn't tithe the produce that they sold to other people. They only tithed their own produce. The rabbis come along and say, no, this is not only for a blind person that has a block in front of them, that it's a hekesh to teach you something broader in other cases. And that is why they're requiring you to do these tithes, to make sure that your fellow Jew is not in some way endangered of eating tevel. That is going to be why they are instituting these things. Now, the Gemara says that it was taught in a Brisa. Why were the shops of the people of Hanun destroyed 3 years before the Holy Temple was destroyed? And the Gemara says, for they would exempt the produce they grew from the Meiser obligations by selling it in their shops. Pnei Moshe says that they would sell their untithed crops in their shops, and neither the sellers nor the buyers considered themselves obligated to tithe the produce. So what's happening here, right? They're creating a circumstance where even on these smaller transactions that people are coming to the shops and the person buying is assuming, oh, the shopkeeper is tithing it, I don't need to worry about it. And the person who's selling it is saying, look, this is all d'Rabbanan anyway, I don't care. And I'm going to sell it and I'm not going to worry about it. And now what's happening is you have a class of Amoratzim who are coming and buying it and using it and eating tevel. And it's very serious. The people of Hanun, because they wouldn't follow these rabbinic restrictions, set up a case where their fellow Jews are now eating tevel. They've set up a stumbling block for their fellow Jews by offering this stuff for sale in violation of what the rabbis are saying. And what does Hashem do? Hashem looks at this and destroys this particular area in the shuk, this particular area, before everyone else goes. And why is that? Why is it that you see the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, where it's talking about robbery, that's in the Torah, and you're seeing the destruction of the flood in Noah's time when it's talking about robbery? And because robbery has a special case. In the case over here where you're dafka not making the tithes and you're creating a situation where nobody's tithing it, you're robbing from the tribe of the Kohanim. You're taking out their tithes that they're supposed to be getting in the Torah. It's their property. And you're also taking away the Truma Gedola, which belongs to the tribe of Aaron. It belongs to the tribe of the Levim. You're diminishing their property. You are robbing them. And Hashem does not like robbery. Why? What's the big problem with robbery? Robbery is a statement that says that yesh od milvado. It's a statement that says there's another power in the universe other than Hashem, and it's me. And I'm going to determine how property gets arranged and organized and distributed. The amazing thing about Seder Zerayim comes along and says, no, this is not your property. When Hashem is giving you grain, that is Hashem giving it to you, okay? And therefore, you have to do a certain set of things, like in Masechet Brachos. You have to make a bracha before you eat the food, right? Because the Gemara says over there in Brachos, it says it's Hashem's food until you release it by saying a bracha on it. That's why you have to say a bracha before, that's d'Rabbanan, and after, that's going to be d'Oraita. So by going and making the brachas on it, you're releasing it because it's Hashem's property. Hashem's giving it to you. The other thing that you have to get in your mind about Seder Zerayim is that this heaping pile of grain is not yours. Inside of it are other ties, like rights for the poor with Peah. Also, this property is intermingled with property that belongs to the tribe of the Kohanim and the Levim. And only after you go and you tithe it and you release it and you separate out that property does that become your property. Hashem is giving it to you after you go ahead and do the other tithes. Why? Because the Kohanim don't have land and the Levim don't have land. This is how the Torah mandates it. So when you're coming along and you're not separating dafka, not separating out the Meiser obligations, and you're not coming and tithing anything, you're saying, look, I don't really care what the Torah says about property of others, specifically Levim and Kohanim. I don't particularly care about releasing this. I'm considering this grain as mine. I grew it, it's mine, and I'm selling it. And the tug and pull in the Torah goes back to the first man, Adam, where Hashem says to Adam, don't eat from the tree. This is my property, don't eat from the tree. And Adam and Chava go ahead and they eat from the tree. And that is a statement of yesh od mulvado. The tug and pull is there a statement in the universe of ein od mulvado, which means that there's only one power in the universe, and it's Hashem, and Hashem is continuously creating, and not only that, but also distributing material to the appropriate person. Hashem is feeding the individual person, each individual person in the universe, each individual blade of grass, says the Yerushalmi in Masechet Tanis, gets an individual amount of water that it needs for that individual grass wherever it is. Hashem is always running the universe and attributing material to sustain the creation as he sees fit. And that is the statement of Ein Od Milvado, that Hashem is running the universe and is distributing the sustenance that each creature needs. And when you are coming along and saying, no, I'm going to steal, I'm going to go do robbery, you are coming and saying, not that Ein Od Milvado, you're saying, yes, Od Milvado, there's another force in the universe, and that I am that other force, that I can determine how property is distributed. I can go and, say, how things should be sustained. And in fact, the sustenance should be more for me because I need more, right? It's a statement that Hashem doesn't know what he's doing, that Hashem is not in charge of my sustenance. It's a statement that I'm in charge of my sustenance. And that is really the trigger for why Hashem looks at the people when they're doing avodah zarah in the time before the flood, and they're doing all sorts of sexual perversion, which is terrible, but it's the robbery that triggers it. It's the robbery that goes on, because now you're impacting other people. When you're going and doing avodah zarah, it's terrible, and it's the biggest degradation. It's a personal degradation. It's a degradation against Hashem. But that's a statement of between sins that are between you and Hashem. Now you're coming along with these sins that are it's now a sin against you and Hashem, because you're denying that there's only one creator in the world, and you're denying his providence over the world, and you're denying that he sustains the creation and distributes material in the world as he sees fit. That's the point of robbing, is that you're saying, no, this material should belong to me. It shouldn't belong to the tribe of the Kohanim. It shouldn't belong to the tribe of the Levim. It should be for me to sell. And like what the people in the shops of Hanun were doing. And then you have this other case about the people that are sitting there trying to follow, and they're being stolen from. So now you have a case where you have sins against man and man as well. And that's the particular nastiness of the robbery. Robbery is not only a sin and a testimony that you're saying that implicit is that there's another power in the universe, and that I run the show, not Hashem. And that is an affront. And you damage the world. A lot of people wonder, why is it that Masechet Avodah Zarah is in Nezikin? Nezikin is the law of damages. You have Baba Batra over there. You have things about property rights. And the reason why is very simple, because you are going and giving a testimony when you go and you do Avodah Zarah and you go do this robbery, that you're saying that this is not Hashem's creation. Hashem is not in charge. And you're making kilkul, you're making damage to the universe by coming and spreading this to other people, that Hashem is not in control, that this is not Hashem's creation, that the Bria is not done by Hashem, that is done by some other means, and that there's not, that Hashem is not the power that's in charge. You're coming and making a testimony that some other power is in charge. And in the terms of stealing, like in the case of the grain, you are doing the robbery, and that is a physical testimony that denies that Hashem is in charge of everything. And that is why Masechet Avodah Zarah is over there in Nezikin. Over here, one of the things to drill into your mind over Zerayim is this is not your property. This pile of grain is not your property until you go and you do the tithes. Once you separate out the tithes, it falls into the category away from Zerayim into Nezikin. It's now yours to use. But the point is, when you're making money, Hashem is sustaining you. Hashem is giving it to you. Okay? That is Hashem's property, and Hashem is giving it to you. And that is the beautiful thing about doing business honestly. And, one of the things about, everybody says, no Loshen Hara and everything else. One of the things, and that's all true, but one of the things to clean up in your life, besides working on Loshen Hara, which you should always be working on, studying the laws of Loshen Hara, is studying the laws of honest business transactions, learning what it is so that you have clean money. And so that when you're doing money, that's really what Hashem is giving you. Hashem is really giving you this sustenance. And then what do? You take out your tithes, and you are rectifying this so that this is now entirely yours. But again, when Hashem is giving you this is Hashem's. And you are only getting the right to use it. And that is the nastiness of robbery, because you're denying that. Now, the Gemara says, why were the shops of the people Hanun destroyed 3 years before the Holy Temple was destroyed? And it says, because they would exempt the produce that they grew from the Meiser obligations by selling it in the shops. And basically, they were selling their untithed produce. And they created a situation where the buyers were also not tithing as well. The Gemara says they expounded the verse, which is going to be the source for tithing. One of the sources is in Beurim 14:22. And it says like this. It says, tithe, you shall tithe all the produce of your seed that goes forth from the field year by year. And the next verse says, and you shall eat before Hashem your God in the place that he will choose to rest his name there, the tithe of your grain, your wine, and your oil. Now, they would read it like this. They would say, tithe, you shall tithe all the produce of your seed, and you shall eat. And they would tithe it like this. They read it in a way to twist the words of the Torah to make sure that they don't have to tithe. And what would they do? They would say, tithe, you shall tithe all the produce of your seed. And what they would say is this excludes from the Meiser obligations one who buys produce from another. And basically the word zerah, where it's talking about your seed, says Rosh Rilio, is implying that only one who planted it is obligated to tithe it. So what they're saying is look, I'm just a middleman. I bought this seed from the farmer. And if he's, going to be growing it, he's in charge of tithing it. I'm just the middleman. I don't have to tithe it. The Torah itself is saying, no, only that guy has to tithe it, not me. And, well, basically what they're saying is that now if I'm selling it to someone else, I'm exempt from tithing. And the Gemara says that this excludes from the Meiser obligation one who buys produce from another. And where it says, you shall eat, this excludes from the Meiser obligation one who sells the produce to another. In other words, they're saying, look, I'm going to be a Torah lawyer here, and I'm going to look at this in a very funny way and twist everything around so I don't have to tithe. And basically, they would read this in a way where it says the farmer has to tithe it and not the guy selling it. And basically what they would be saying is that somebody who's selling untithed produce, neither the seller nor the buyer have any obligation to tithe it. And they would say that this is going to be biblical law. Now, the rabbis decreed that you have to tithe even produce that you sell and even produce that he purchases. And this, by the way, is a fence that the rabbis picked up because you were in a time when you had a lot of farmers that might not have been tithing at all. You had a lot of Amaratzis running around in the country, and they don't want people eating tevel because you have death from heaven. It's a very serious thing. So they're saying, look, if you are a middleman and you're buying produce from a Jewish farmer and you suspect or you know the Jewish farmer is not tithing it, you have to tithe it. If you suspect that he's not tithing it, he might be tithing it, but you suspect he's not tithing it, you have to take the tithes out as demai. The rules of demai apply. But if you know for sure he's not tithing it, you have to tithe it if you buy it from him because it is tevel. And why do you have to tithe it? You have to take out the property that belongs to the tribe of the Kohanim and the Levim. And so they were putting this in because Yochanan Kohen Gadol saw that there was almost an equal amount of people not tithing at all. It was very serious at this time. So the shops of the people at Hanun were destroyed because effectively they were not following this rabbinic decree, and they were reading it in a way of biblical law, in a way to try to exempt themselves from any financial responsibility. But the problem is, in their reading and trying to skirt biblical law, is that they were buying from a class of people that were probably not tithing, or maybe they were doing the Truma Gedola tithe, but you have to take out both sets of tithes, not only the Truma Gedola, but also the Truma Gedola, but also the Truma Meiser, to make sure that this is not tevel. Which are the two tithes? It's going to be the Truma Gedola that goes to the tribe of the Kohanim, and the Truma Meiser that goes to the tribe of the Kohanim after the Levim take out their portion, which is the Meiser Rishon. But the portions are now being cleaned of any kind of property right for someone else that's intermingled in your property. Now, if you have a case where the people who used to be tithing are no longer tithing, you still have a case where somebody has to take out the tithes. And the rabbis are saying that, look, if you're buying this as a middleman from a Jew, you have to be tithing it, because you're going to end up selling it to somebody. Somebody's going to be eating tevel, and you've ended up putting a stumbling block in front of the blind person. So this rabbinic decree makes a lot of sense. This is not like a sort of whimsical sounding thing. This is a thing of practicality that, downstream at the farmer level, you have a lot of people that are just not doing this anymore. They used to, but they don't. And so what's happening over here? You have a case where the people are buying, they're setting up these transactions where nobody's tithing, and they're selling stolen produce. Why is it stolen? Because part of the produce in there has property that belongs to someone else. And Hashem is looking at this with disgust and goes and destroys it before everyone else. This is put in here as a lesson for all of us, because all of us touch money all the time. All of us look at business things or reactions and relations with things that deal with money between people, even if it's not a business transaction. And we have to learn to do honest weights and measures. We have to go back to intense Torah learning on the laws of financial dealings. Because people end up looking at financial things and they justify it. And they say, I'm not stealing, even though they're ignorant of the laws. Or maybe they learned some of the laws 20 years ago. You have to be looking at Torah learning every day. And if you're touching money and you're a businessman, whatever level business you're doing, you should be spending some time every day to go through the laws of Chosh and Mishpat. And very importantly, if you're doing transactions and you're touching money and you're doing financial things, you need to have a posek in your life who is an expert on financial matters. He's a posek on Hosh and Mishpat, and that means that he's an expert in financial Torah transactions, and that way you can ask him, and that way you can make sure that you have clean money. And basically, you want to make sure that your hands are not filled with blood. Now, the Torah elsewhere, the Tanakh elsewhere, says, your prayers are not going to be answered because your hands are filled with blood. And the sages say, Chazal says, what does filled with blood mean? In that particular case, it means that your hands are filled with blood from robbery. Because why is it blood? Because somebody else spent their time and their energy and their sweat and their tears and their blood going and producing something, and you went and you took it from them. You have their blood on your hands. And Hashem comes along in Masechet Barachos, and they point out from the Tanakh, where it says that you can do profuse prayer, but Hashem is not going to listen to your profuse prayer if you're doing robbery. Hashem, it's disgusting to Hashem. It's disgusting. So you have to go and you have to make sure that you have clean money in your life, because that is, in this material world, a big testimony that Ein Od Milvado, that there is only one power in the universe, and he is distributing material in the correct way. Now, the Gemara is going to move on to the Mishnah's fifth ruling, and it says, a Goan and a Levi who purchased. Now, this, by the way, this Mishnah is ruling that a Goan or a Levi who buys untithed produce from the threshing floor before it was made into a smooth pile may keep the truma and meiser he separates from the produce. And this ruling implies that if he bought untithed produce after it was made into a smooth pile, he must give away the truma and the meiser to the other kohanim and the levim. Why is that? Why is that case? Now, this is going to be also something that very interesting. Rabbi Yochanan says the rabbis imposed a penalty upon them. This is a knas. So sometimes the rabbis will put on a penalty because people's behavior will change and they're trying to discourage some sort of activity. And Rabbi Yochanan says they put a penalty upon them so that they should not sprint to the wine presses and the threshing floor to buy untithed produce, and thereby deprive their fellow kohanim and levim of receiving the truma and tithes that they might otherwise receive. In other words, what the rabbis are saying is, look, this new behavior of people coming and running to the threshing floor to go and prevent wealthier kohanim and levim from buying up all this produce at a discount and then depriving poorer kohanim, it's a form of theft. And the wealthy ones would go to the farmers, they'd buy up the crop, and they would use the truma and meiser that they're supposed to be getting in part of the calculation. And so effectively they'd say, like, look, they would get the benefit of the truma and the meiser in the transaction. They would end up discounting it to the farmer then, so that they didn't have to pay as much for it. And basically it would work like this. If you had a farmer who'd produce like 100 zuz of grain, normally it's give away 2% of the crop as truma. 10% of the remainder is meiser rishon, and he's left with 88 zuz of crop. Now, a kohanim or a kohen or a levi that has money to invest would go offer the farmer 92 zuz for 100 zuz. And now the farmer saying, well, I'm keeping 4 more, right? So instead of only getting 88, I'm getting 92. Effectively, the kohen is using these tithes as, because he's going to be getting it anyway, as a financial point to come along and do transactions. And you're not supposed to be doing transactions with these things, right? You're not supposed to be using truma or meiser rishon as debt or as something that's like currency or money for buying something like that. So what would happen is you would end up doing these deals, and first of all, you, as Masechet Demai says, you end up degrading the truma and the meiser rishon, and it's forbidden to do. And so you take something that has sanctity and now you're doing these not nice transactions with it, you're degrading it. And that could be a violation, says Masechet Demai, of a Torah injunction. And also what ends up happening is a theft problem, because now you're doing business with Truma and Meiser Rishon in a scheme that ends up abusing poor Kohanim or Levim, and it ends up being considered to be a form of theft, because you're not supposed to be doing business with these sorts of tithes, and the guy would be ending up, taking discounts so that he's using the tithe he'd ordinarily be getting to come along and give a cheaper, pay a higher price to the farmer so that, he can get access to this. And normally the farmer has to just give it away, right? So he has to normally just give it away. And basically they would be depriving fellow Kohanim or Levim from getting truma and tithes that they would normally get. Gemara now talks about another instance in which a Kohen is required to give away a gift to other Kohanim, where they have a gift for the Kohen. And the Gemara says, concerning a Kohen who is a butcher, that means he's going to slaughter animals to sell the meat. The colleague said in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, he is exempt from giving the Kohanic gifts of the foreleg, jaw, and maw, that's going to be the mouth, the jaw, and the maw actually is from the up to the trachea, by the way. So so it's the throat area. Anyway, the Kohanim, they don't have to give it to the other Kohanim for a week. And after that week, they have to give away these gifts. So what would happen in the old days is you'd have these portable shops, and you could go from area to area and you could sell meat. And basically, if you're going to be established that, and you're going to have like a shop at the shuk, and it's going to be like you're really like a retail presence there, then you don't have to give it away for a week. And after a week, now you have to give away to the other Kohanim. You can't keep it for yourself. You have to give it to someone else, even though you're a Kohen. And what would happen is you had a case where some people had these portable booths, and they really did go from area to area, and if they were going to stay for a shorter period of time, they wouldn't do it. So you have a similar report. Rabbi Yossi says, I went to the south of Eretz Yisrael, and I heard Rabbi Hanan, the father of Rabbi Shimon, say in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi that he, the Kohen butcher, is exempt from giving the gifts of the Kohen, this is going to be the foreleg, jaw, and the maw, to other Kohanim for a week, and after that, he has to give the gifts. Now, the Gemara is going to suggest a reason that a Kohen butcher must give away the gifts. Rabbi Yudan compares this law concerning the Kohen butcher to the law concerning the Kohen and the Levi who buy untithed produce after it is made into a pile, and they smoothed it. In other words, it's going back to this rich guy who comes and he's buying the gifts at a discount for himself, and he's getting access to this to deprive other people. So the reason stated by Rabbi Yochanan is that the rabbis imposed a penalty upon them to prevent them from depriving their fellow Kohanim and Levim from receiving Truma Meiser from the farmers. And here too, the rabbis imposed a penalty on a Kohen who slaughters animals and sells them to prevent him from depriving his fellow Kohen of receiving the Kohen gifts, and also from butchers who are not Kohanim. So since a Kohen, says Rabbi Kanievsky, since this Kohen butcher may keep and sell the entire animal, including the gift portions, which can be eaten by anyone, he's able to sell his meat more cheaply than a butcher who's not a Kohen and who has to give away these portions. So by becoming a butcher and taking business away from non-Kohen butchers who would otherwise give away these gifts, he is effectively depriving his fellow Kohanim of giving these gifts, of receiving these gifts. So this is a penalty based on the new dishonesty that came along in business just before the destruction of the temple and also just after the destruction of the temple. This is going to be, even when Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is talking about it, which is definitely one of the Amorim and definitely after the destruction of the temple. The Gemara is going to reject this reason. Rabbi Yosef says to them, if the reason that the Kohen butcher must give away the gifts on account of this penalty, then he should not be exempt from the penalty for even 1 week. In other words, if we're so worried about this undercutting that can happen, and you have these people who are kohanim coming and popping up these businesses to come and basically undercut non-Kohen butchers because they now are keeping the meat for themselves and then selling it because they're allowed to sell the foreleg. They just have to get it first. Now the Kohen, he's keeping it for himself instead of giving it to another Kohen. And now he's putting it on the market and selling it. He's undercutting everybody else. So basically, if this is going to be the reason, Rabbi Yosef is saying, why not just make sure that nobody can do it? So the Gemara is going to expand on Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's ruling and explain it. It says, concerning a Kohen who is a shopkeeper, in other words, he sells meat in a marketplace and he's going to have an established stall and he's going to be showing up there every day. Rabbi Yudin says in this Gemara, we exempt him for 1 week from giving the gifts to the other Kohanim. Rabbi Yossi says, we do not exempt them even for 1 week. So Rabbi Yossi agrees with that. Now, the Gemara is going to get into this, and Rabbi Yudin says that a shopkeeping butcher is treated no more stringently than a regular butcher. And according to Rabbi Yossi, he is. So according to the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, what difference is there between a shopkeeper and an ordinary butcher? And it says that a shopkeeper can deceive, whereas an ordinary butcher cannot deceive. So the shops in the Talmudic era were going to be portable booths, and they could be set up in a marketplace. And shopkeepers are going to be a little bit different. They're going to be where they could go for a few days in a town, set up a booth, and then move it. And if they were going to allow an ordinary Kohen shopkeeper to keep and sell the gifts during the first week of business, he could go from place to place and claim that this is his first week of business. So the rabbis are, for this portable shop, are not giving this 1 week dispensation. And for the place that is going to be established, it's going to be like a regular place in the shuk, they're going to give this 1 week exemption, and thereafter he has to take the foreleg and give it away to another Kohen. He can't take it, keep it for himself, and now do business with it and go and sell it. Because again, with the gifts for the Kohen, a Kohen, this foreleg doesn't have kedusha, right? So he's allowed to go and sell it to a regular Yisrael, and the regular Yisrael can go and eat it. But in Truma Gedola, you can't go do that. By the way, you can't go do that because you have tamei tahor issues where you can't allow this food to become contaminated, and maybe the Yisrael is an Am Haaretz, maybe they'll contaminate it, and this has kedusha, and this is for that Kohen to use. This is not for transaction. But in the case of the foreleg, he can go do business with it. He just has the right to get it. Now, how is it that the other person can't deceive? Well, if you have a permanent shop, you see him day 1, day 2, day 3, up to day 7, he's there. And after that, he has to be giving it away. Other Kohanim can come and collect it. Now, the Mishnah was stating that a Kohen or a Levi who bought untithed produce after it was heaped into a pile and smoothed has to give away the truma and the meiser to other people. The Gemara now is going to cite a brisa that discusses whether poor people who buy untithed produce must give away the meiser ani as well to others. So what happens now? Meiser ani, by the way, is the tithe for the poor people. You have a 7-year cycle in Eretz Yisrael, and meiser rishon is given in 4 of those years, and in 2 of the years it's going to be meiser ani. Meiser ani is a gift that goes to the poor people, and that's going to be in year 3 and year 6. So in year 3 or year 6, the question is going to be, somebody comes along and he's the poor person's now trying to save up his money to go access the meiser ani, and he's going to be the one trying to buy it up, and he's going to be trying to buy up untithed produce, and he's going to be trying to do business with this meiser ani, effectively doing the same thing that the rich person does, is trying to do, where he's saying, look, this is mine by right, and now I can offer you a higher price because anyway I'm getting this back, and I can afford to now pay you more because, and effectively you're taking something that has sanctity and you're doing business with it. You're not allowed to do that. So the Gemara says it was taught in a brisa. Rebbe and Rabbi Yudah the Nasi did not disagree with regard to a Jew who buys from a non-Jew produce that is attached from the ground, and that is subject to the Meiser obligation. And so too with regard to a Jew who enters in his stead. So the Mara Fulda says like this. He says, where a Jew actually leases the land from the non-Jew and grew the produce on it, it goes without saying that the produce in this case is subject to maestros. This, by the way, is very similar to Masechet Demai, where you have the same case come up with Rebbe and Rabbi Yudah Hanasi about a sharecropper who's coming and buying the right to use the land, or he's making a deal where they'll split the right and harvest the crop and split the profits of what's there. And they're getting it from a non-Jew, and it's still attached to the ground. What's going to be the status? And now, a lot of times, this might be done by somebody who is able to collect Meiser Ni. In other words, the guy's poor, and he's going to say, look, you have land here, and let me go and farm it, and we'll split it. We'll split what grows. The Gemara says, nor did they disagree with regard to a Jew who buys from a non-Jew produce that is already detached from the ground, heaped into a pile and smoothed. And that basically is that it's exempt from the Meiser obligation. So this goes to over there, chapter 5, Halacha 3 in Masechet Demai, where there's a debate. Does produce that's growing from the land from a non-Jew, is that going to be subject to tithes or not? And over there in Masechet Demai, chapter 5, Halacha 3, the case is going to be talking about a non-Jew who's holding boxes of grain as a sort of like a bank. In other words, he's basically taking deposits and then returning them, and he's basically like storage. And over there, the debate is, do you have to tie these boxes or not? And basically it comes up, well, Rabbi Meir, that opinion in that mission is going to be Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is saying, look, things that grow by a non-Jew in Eretz Yisrael is subject to tithes because the land has Kedusha. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai disagrees and says, no, that even though a non-Jew has it, they're not subject to tithes on it, because only a Jew is going to be subject to tithes, and a non-Jew can own the land. That's what the debate's going to be about. And Rebbe and Rabbi Yudah Nasi are actually going to be agreeing with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai on that. So that's why they're going to be agreeing on that. But over here, the Gemara says, with regard to one who buys from his fellow Jew in a Meiser in the year, detached produce that's been heaped and smoothed. So now, what do they agree about? They agreed, okay, you're buying from the non-Jew. It's going to be like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and okay, no problem. We agree, and that it's going to be exempt. They're saying that the non-Jew produce doesn't have to be tithed. But over here, you're buying from a Jew now in a Meiser in a year from detached produce, and it's already been smoothed out. You have to tithe it. And Rabbi Yudah Hanasi says that whether the buyer is poor or wealthy, we take their Meiser Ani away from him, even if he's poor. And in other words, basically they're saying that he has to give the Meiser Ani of the crop to someone else. He can't keep it for himself. Rebbe says that if the buyer is wealthy, we take the Meiser Ani away from him. But if he's poor, he's entitled to receive it, and we do not take it away from him. He can keep it for himself. What is going to be the problem with this maloket, right? And I think both would agree, right? If you have the poor person coming along and using the Meiser Ani as leverage in this transaction to help to buy at a different price than what ordinarily would be done, that is going to be something where everybody would say you're not allowed to use the Meiser Ani as a financial tool in the transaction to change the purchase price. But over here, where the person is not doing that, is the poor person allowed to come and keep the Meiser Ani? He's paying fair market price, and he's not, the Meiser Ani has no value in there. But now he's taking it for himself. Rebbe's saying that's okay. So the Gemara is going to analyze Rabbi Yudah Hanasi's view, and the Gemara is going to say, what is Rabbi Yudah Hanasi's reason for ruling that even a poor buyer who's entitled to Meiser Ani must give away the Meiser Ani to a different poor person. And the Gemara explains, it says, just as a poor person may not take and acquire the leket, shricha, and peah of his own field, so too he should not be able to acquire the Meiser Ani of his produce. And basically what this is saying is it's saying that, says Amara Fulda, that this is derived from a Gezerah Shava, where it says that, and for the stranger. And over there it's saying for the stranger in the Torah for leket and Meiser Ani. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi is saying that over here, where it's talking about peah and leket, that it means that you have to give it to someone else. And over here, for Meiser Ani, the same term is used here, and it's meaning that you also have to give it away. You can't keep it. You can't go do a transaction for it and keep it for yourself. And that's what he's saying. And he's using a deraita term. He's saying, look, in the deraita, it's saying for a stranger. And Velager, saying for the stranger. And that means that it's someone else. So Gemara looks at Rebbe's position. Gemara says, what is Rebbe's reason for ruling that a poor buyer does not give away the Meiser Ani? And he would agree that even a poor man is obligated to give away the Meiser Ani of his produce to someone else. Gemara explains it. He says, the leket, shricha, and peah obligations do not render grain tevel. That's an interesting way to look at it. So the Vilna Goan is going to explain this sugya like this. He's going to say, although there's an obligation to leave leket, shricha, and peah of the harvest for the poor, there is no prohibition to eat from the produce before those have been left. And accordingly, we cannot consider cut grain as containing these gifts until they've actually been separated. So this, by the way, also comes up in Masechet Demai in chapter 7, Halacha 1. In other words, when is it that you're going to have to do it? If you're going to, and you can use it, when does it become tevel, right? At what point is it tevel? And over there in Masechet Demai, they're having cases where they're doing mental designations. There's a little bit of time gap, and then they're physically taking it out a little bit later. And in the case of Demai, that's going to be permitted. In the case of definite tevel, that's going to be not permitted, because Rabbi Yossi over there is going to be saying that this is a ta'aseh, and you have to do all of it at the same time. But in the case of Demai, that's going to be a derabanan thing. You are going to be allowed to do that. And over here, it's also going to be a case of brera. And Rebbe holds that there is no brera. So Rebbe is going to basically be saying that that a little bit different case. In other words, when is it that it's going to be turning into tevel? And again, this comes up to Rebbe's point about whether there's brera or not. And the Gemara says, in our case, it already became tevel on account of Meiser Ani while it was still in the possession of the first owner. In other words, he's saying that when the Meiser Ani is eventually separated, it is considered the Meiser Ani of the seller's produce, not what the buyer comes and buys later. So in other words, if he's going to be poor and he's the buyer, he may keep it for himself. Again, this is also going to be an argument whether there's going to be brera or not. And Vilna Goan says about this, since the Meiser Ani is considered to have been present in the produce while it was still in the hands of the seller, the buyer is considered to have received it from him, even though the buyer is the one who actually separates it. And this is going to be because Rebbe does not hold that there's brera. In other words, that Rebbe is holding that this Meiser Ani is already in there somewhere, okay? And if it was going to be in the case of brera, it would be like that, where you could say, okay, you can now take it out as the buyer, and you can go ahead and use it. Rebbe's coming along and saying, no, you can't. Even if you're separating it out, the Meiser Ani was already in there, and so it was already in the possession of the first owner, and therefore, it's going to be where it's considered as if the Meiser Ani already exists in the seller's produce, and it's not the buyer's produce. And the Gemara is basically presenting an argument that continues Rebbe's view, and it's going to say what then is Rabbi Yehuda the Hanasi's reason for ruling that a poor person who buys cut produce must give away the Meiser Ani to someone else? And the Gemara says it is certainly deemed the Meiser Ani of the seller's produce, shouldn't it be permitted to the poor buyer? And the Gemara is going to finish up and it's going to answer. It's going to say on account of this penalty. In other words, that just as our Mishnah is penalizing a Goan or a Levi who buys untithed produce and requires him to give away the Truma of Meiser to other Goanim or Levim, so too over here, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi is penalizing the poor person who buys the untithed produce by requiring him to give away the Meiser Ani to other poor people. And basically, the sages are trying to prevent a poor person from running to the wine press and the threshing floor, buying the untithed produce at a discount, and depriving the Meiser Ani that might have been given to some other poor person. That's going to be the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. In other words, he's saying, why is it that you're not allowed to do it? It's because it's a rabbinic penalty, and it's going to encourage in this day where people are not following good business practices and they're not so honest at this point, and they're going to run and they're going to try to use the Meiser Ani as leverage in a financial transaction to get to get more grain and to pay a little bit more, but basically get it at a discount because let's say there's 100 say of grain and they should be buying it at it really would be 88. The farmer would really be doing it at 88. You're buying it 92, but you're getting back 10% of it after tithes as Meiser Ani. Well, that's going to be worth a lot for that poor person. So you can use that as a tool for this transaction, but you're not allowed to do that. And so they're putting on a penalty, says Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Now, why is it that what's Rebbe's ruling? Gemara says, what is Rebbe's reason for ruling that a poor person who buys untithed produce does not give away the Meiser Ani? In other words, why do we not penalize him just like we do for the Goan or the Levi? The Gemara answers. It says, a rich person has the resources to buy a large quantity of untithed produce at a discount, and a poor person does not have the resources to buy a large quantity of untithed produce at a discount. In other words, Rebbe is saying that there's no reason to put in a penalty to prevent this kind of behavior of buying tevel at a discount because he doesn't have a lot of money. He can't buy a big quantity of it anyway. What's he going to buy? He's poor. So the Gemara is going to explain the root of this dispute as to whether a penalty should be imposed. And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says that it is common for a poor person to be able to borrow money, and therefore maybe he doesn't have a lot of money, but he's borrowing the money and using that borrowed money to buy at a transactional discount and to deprive other people of Meiser Ani, and also to abuse the tithe by using the Meiser Ani as part of this transaction cost. You're not allowed to use that as a debt or for things like like a financial thing like that. And the Gemara says, whereas Rebbe says that it is not common for a poor person to be able to borrow, and therefore he's saying a penalty is not necessary. So we see here that it's so important to look at honest transactions and to dig into Torah learning and to learn how to do honest transactions, because that is a Kiddush Hashem, and that is a statement of Ein Od Milvado, and that you believe in your life that there's no other power other than Hashem. Have a great day.